The Olivet Discourse took place just outside of the city of Jerusalem on a mount called the Mount of Olives. Here we can see the Mount of Olives. On the left we can see the old city walls of Jerusalem as it would have been in the days of Jesus, and between the two we have the Kidron Valley. Today, as in Jesus' day, the old city of Jerusalem was dominated by Temple Mount, where the Jewish temple used to abide, but today has on it the Islamic Dome of the Rock. The Olivet Discourse is recorded in Matthew 24 and 25, but we'll only be referring to Matthew 24, Mark 13 and Luke chapter 21. Okay, as you can see, I've got all the relevant chapters lined up beside one another, although they're in reverse order to what you'll find in the Bible. I've done this for convenience sake because we'll be dealing with Luke 21 first. Before we begin, we first need to look at the start and the end of Luke 21. We need to do this because it will help us understand the structure and the course of events that took place on the day that Jesus gave the Olivet Discourse. Now during the day he was teaching in the temple, but at evening he would go out and spend the night on the mount that is called Olivet, and all of the people would get up early in the morning and come to him in the temple to listen to him. So straight away we know Jesus' daily routine, that he would sleep on the Mount of Olives, and then early in the morning he would walk through the Kidron Valley up into the temple and teach all day. And then at evening he would come out, walk back through the Kidron Valley and retire on the Mount of Olives. This may seem trivial, but it's going to help us understand the chronological order of the Olivet Discourse. The beginning of Luke 21 is going to tell us where Jesus is, and so we can anticipate what he's going to do next. Jesus looked up and saw the rich putting their gifts into the offering box, and he saw a poor widow put in 2 small copper coins. And he said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of them, for they all contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, put in all that she had to live on." Not only do these 4 verses tell us that God doesn't see as a man, or judge as a man, but looks at the heart, it also tells us where Jesus is, for the offering was given in the temple, and the preceding chapters of Luke 21, Mark 13 and Matthew 24 also confirm that Jesus is in the temple at this time. So we can anticipate that at some point Jesus is going to leave the temple and walk back to the Mount of Olives. And in the next 2 verses of Luke, Mark and Matthew, this is what we find. "And while some were talking about the temple, that it was adorned with beautiful stones and votive gifts, he said, As for these things which you are looking at, the days will come in which there will not be one stone left upon another, which will not be torn down." And in Mark, Jesus came out of the temple and was going away when his disciples came to point out the temple buildings to him. And he said to them, "Do you not see all these things? Truly I say to you, not one stone here will be left upon another, which will not be torn down." And Matthew goes on to say the same. "And as he was going out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, Teacher, behold, what wonderful stones and what wonderful buildings. And Jesus said to him, Do you not see all these buildings? Not one stone here will be left upon another, which will not be torn down." So I think we can all agree that all 3 Gospels here are recording the same account, that Jesus has came out of the temple. But what is notable is what Jesus didn't say. Jesus didn't say to the disciples, "Look at this great building, look at these huge stones, but know this, that over thousands of years the weather will wear it down and it will slowly crumble and disappear." But what he said in all 3 accounts is that the temple would be torn down. As they begin their walk, the disciples asked Jesus about something that he just said. In verse 7, they questioned him, saying, "Teacher, when therefore will these things happen? And what will be the sign when these things are about to take place?" It isn't hard for us to understand what they're asking about, for he's just told them that the temple is going to be destroyed and torn down. So what they're asking is, simply, when is the temple going to be destroyed? Jesus then proceeds to answer their question, and basically the record we have of Jesus' walk back to the Mount of Olives is an answer to that question, when the temple is going to be destroyed. But we should notice that he throws in something here which is from the future, an end-time event, and then proceeds to say after this end-time event, but before all of these things, In other words, he mentions an end time event, and then he says, before all of these things, and then he answers their question about when the temple is going to be destroyed. So, just a quick recap. Jesus is in the temple. He leaves the temple, and he starts to make his way back to the Mount of Olives. They ask him a question about when the temple is going to be destroyed. He tells them about an end time event, and then he says before that end time event, and then he answers their question about when the temple is going to be destroyed, which obviously is before this end time event. However, if we go over to the Mark and Matthew account, we find the whole record of his journey back to the Mount of Olives missing. For from verse 2, when we know he's outside the temple, to verse 3 we read, "As he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately saying," and in Matthew likewise, "As he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John and Andrew were questioning him privately." So we obviously have something missing between verse 2 and verse 3, and that is the record we have of his journey back. The question about the temple being destroyed and his answer to it is all missing in the Mark and Matthew account. However, we find a similar question. They go on to say, "Tell us when will these things happen, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" And likewise in Matthew, "Tell us when these things will be, and what will be the sign when all these things are going to be fulfilled." Now, in this order, we can instantly think that's the same question, and they're asking about when the temple is going to be destroyed. But they're not. It's a different question. What they're asking is about something that he said on his journey back to the Mount of Olives, where they're now sitting. And that question is the end time event we've just referred to. Jesus then, while on the Mount of Olives, continues to answer their question. He repeats the end time event which he spoke of on his way back from the Mount of Olives, and then he proceeds to say what's going to happen after it. And the rest of that he answers down to here, and then Luke catches up. So we have the record of his journey back from the Mount of Olives missing from the Matthew and Mark account, yet we have his answer to a future end time question missing from the Luke account. But eventually all Gospels harmonise and come up to the same point in time. So we have half of the verses in chronological order, and the other half of the verses in chronological order, with these verses overlapping. So the logical thing would be to do is to move the whole study into chronological order. And now the Olivet Discourse should make a lot more sense. For we have first Jesus in the temple. Jesus leaves the temple and mentions that the temple is going to be destroyed. The disciples ask him a question about what he just said, asking him when is the temple going to be destroyed. He then quotes an end time event. He then says before this end time event certain things are going to happen, and then he quotes the destruction of the temple. All this he says on his way back to the Mount of Olives. He eventually reaches the Mount of Olives, and four of his disciples ask him a question about something he said on the way back from the Mount of Olives. We know what that is because he re-quotes it. It's that end time event he spoke of. He then spends the rest of his time here answering the question about that end time event and when he's going to appear. He quotes this and answers this question, and then eventually all of the Gospels harmonise. So why do so many Christians, such as myself, have such difficulty separating these two events? It is because they both have so many similar verses, yet they're not similar because they're the same event, but because they're concerning the same people and the same location, the Jews and Jerusalem. The first in our past, which took place in 70 AD when Rome attacked Israel and destroyed Jerusalem, and the second in our future, likewise, at Armageddon, when the world nations will attack Israel once more. If we should understand what took place in 70 AD, we'll have a great understanding of what's going to take place soon at Armageddon and the end of the age.